as FDR said, we would not have to worry about he said, a fascist takeover as long as democracy delivered on its promises. And what's been happening for decades is that democracy has not delivered on its promises. What does that mean? Well, in every other advanced democracy, people have universal health care, and they have tuition-free college, and they have free childcare, and they have a guaranteed living wage, and they have family leave, and they have paid sick leave. So why don't we have that? This is an example. So the reason we don't have that is because the power in this country has been handed over to this matrix of corporate forces.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. This is Andrew, and I feel like I'm floating in a cloud right now, a dream cloud, because I have to introduce my guest here. I am with Marianne Williamson, who I one day hope to call President Williamson. Please. She is a best-selling author, political activist, and spiritual thought leader. For over 3 decades, she has been a leader in spiritual and religiously progressive circles. She is the author of 15 books. 4 of them are #1 New York Times bestsellers. Something that really speaks to me is she founded Project Angel Food, which is a nonprofit organization. It has delivered more than 14 million meals to ill and dying homebound patients since 1989. And the intention was to help people suffering from HIV and AIDS. So we'll definitely get into that with your LGBTQ plus platform and policies. She's worked and focused on poverty issues, racial reconciliation issues. In 2004, she co-founded the Peace Alliance, supports the creation of a U.S. Department of Peace. In 2020, she ran for the Democratic nomination for president. And in 2024, she is running against, well, I would say against Joe Biden, but she's put her name into the hat to run as a Democratic candidate. And I am so thankful that you have joined us here, Marianne, to just open up about why you're running and all of the policies that you are promoting right now.
Well,
So
thank you.
you.
Thank you for having me on and giving me the opportunity to talk to you. So shoot, tell me what you want to know.
Yes. Well, so you know what? First, since you are in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room,
Okay.
and I'm about to defend my PhD, my dissertation in the summer.
What are you getting your
Right.
PhD in?
It's in literature, in English.
English. So what's your particular area?
Oh, so it's 19th century LGBTQ poetics with Walt Whitman and Oscar Wilde.
Wow.
Huh.
Wow. That's fantastic. Okay. And where are you in school?
At Stony Brook University.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, where Stephanie Kelton teaches.
Oh, and I know Stephanie. So wasn't Whitman a New Yorker?
Yes. Yep. Born and
Yeah.
raised on Long Island.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's very amazing. And of course, it didn't end well in that area for Oscar Wilde, and really one of the great tragedies in LGBTQ history. Yeah. And
Well,
in
exactly.
literature. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually what drew me to Wilde was
Mhm.
that history of what happens when someone gets put on trial for this new idea of being a homosexual and all of that backlash. And unfortunately, I mean, let's start there. We sadly are in this anti-LGBTQ
Yeah.
plus ravage that's happening with southern states, with drag queens, with transgender
Yeah.
people being under attack. You know, what's going on, do you think, Marianne?
Well, what's going on is an explosion of mean-spiritedness that has occurred within the public imagination in the United States. You look at stories like Oscar Wilde, and you're reminded that this is very, very serious, that there have been times in history, and there are still places in the world, let's not kid ourselves, where even today people are oppressed, who are in the LGBTQ AI plus community, who are oppressed, who are suppressed, who are imprisoned, and who are executed. Now, I don't see execution occurring here, but there is a trend of oppression and suppression. There is no doubt about it. And we do have to take a stand. I wish I could say that's hyperbole and, oh, it's just a moment and it will pass, but we can't afford to treat it like that. Homophobia, like antisemitism, like racism, these are ancient, malevolent factors in human consciousness. They become asymptomatic at their best, but they have throughout history a way of reappearing. And we must be vigilant on behalf of justice when they do, particularly as Americans, particularly in a society that is dedicated to the proposition that the country belongs to everyone, that all men are created equal, that all men are given by God inalienable rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Now, at our best, we are constantly expanding that democratic franchise. Gay marriage, marriage equality was a movement where there was an expansion. In my lifetime, I've seen a real expansion of consciousness about gay people, which I think was brought about. You know, when the AIDS crisis happened, you really saw American prejudice on full display, but you also saw a transformation in that area that also occurred because of it. Now we're dealing with this anti-trans movement. Very serious. I will be traveling at the end of this month to East Tennessee University for a protest there. This idea of criminalizing drag shows and everything that goes along with that, plus the particularly disturbing idea that they are putting into the public that somehow gay people, transgender people are dangerous for children. Now, when I was growing up and in my early adulthood, we went from the idea of it being preposterous, of course, for gay people to adopt children, to that becoming an accepted and acceptable and recognized as positive phenomenon. I was the godmother of two sons, parented by a gay man myself, who was then the godfather to my daughter. Now we're moving backwards, you know, in an individual life, just like in the life of a nation. It's not always a straight line. Sometimes it's 2 steps backward, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But this is a very disturbing 1 step back. And as Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So we have to be having this conversation. We have to be talking about it. We have to keep it in the public dialogue so that more and more people will know to push back on these very unjust forces, which are now creeping into state houses all over this country, along with other neo-fascist and authoritarian acts, whether it has to do with, you know, I saw in Florida that Governor DeSantis wants everyone who is blogging about him to have to, quote unquote, register with the state. If you are even driving with an undocumented worker or having them in your home, you could be charged with a felony, all these kinds of things. So it's a time when all of us must be very alert, and not just alert for our own people. That I think we all need to exit our silos here a little bit. It doesn't matter if they're like you, they're Americans. And I think our dedication needs to be more than to just gay rights or transgender rights or rights of Black people or rights of Jews or anything like that. It has to be that, hey, we're all American. And on a broader scale, of course, we're all human, and not let the particular identity blind us to the larger realization that this is not just about any one of us or any one group. This is about all of us and what all of us have a right to in a free society.
Yeah, well, and actually recently I was in Manhattan with my family, and it had happened. We were there on Sunday. Um, and well, last week, I should say, when this comes out. And there was actually a drag story hour being protested by Proud Boys. And the LGBTQ protesters actually drove the Proud Boys out.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you saw that.
And
Yes.
yeah, didn't I read that Letitia James actually came to the good for her?
Yeah, it was her. I think she
Yeah.
hosted the event.
Good for
Mhm.
her. The attorney, isn't she the Attorney General of New York? Right.
She
That's
is.
way cool. Yeah, I thought that was great. And I saw one of the Proud Boys walking away and saying, "Well, I didn't come here to get beaten up." And it's like, yeah, now you know how we feel when you arrive on the scene. So yeah, it was great. Good on you, New York. Good on
Yeah,
you.
but like you're saying, Marianne, I'm so glad that you are so adamant about this intersectionality of activism. This grassroots activism has to recognize all the marginalized groups coming together, that it can't just be one group fighting for their rights, because everything is part of this same system of oppression, isn't it? Everything with climate change emergency, LGBTQ rights being under attack, that the economic fallout that's happening right now, that it's not
Well,
just one isolated system.
right. We ourselves acquiesce to a kind of divide to conquer strategy if we only identify with our group. I mean, even putting the word marginalized. I mean, anyone who is not, really, to be honest, anyone who is not representing either the ideological or economic propensities of what has become a kind of new ruling class in the United States is marginalized to some extent. Many Black people who are marginalized as Black people are not marginalized economically. Many gay people who are marginalized as gay people are not marginalized economically. That's why I think, going back to this idea that in America we don't do those things, is really our most powerful ideal and the greatest weapon against injustice.
LGBT stories are universal, but each one speaks to the individual heart and soul of the writer telling it. Do you have a story to tell? If so, the Gay and Lesbian Review wants to hear from you. Have you been moved by an LGBT book, film, painting, television show, or other form of media? The GNLR believes in bringing awareness to queer art and artists through reviews, commentary, and thought pieces in which the author relates their personal lives to a particular piece of art, a novel, a movie, or what have you. In addition to the articles published in the print magazine, the GNLR also publishes articles on its blog as well as personal essays on its popular Here's My Story section. This allows people like you to share their own experiences with our readers. To learn more about submitting either to the print or the online edition of the GNLR, visit glreview.org. That's glreview.org, and scroll down to the bottom of the page to find a link to their writer's guidelines. If you have any questions, email stephen.hemrick@glreview.org. The GNLR can't wait to see what you have to say. And remember that they're offering an exclusive code with the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. So when you subscribe to the magazine, you'll receive a free copy with any print or digital subscription. So that's 7 issues instead of 6. Again, just visit theglreview.org and click subscribe and enter the promo code ITBR for your free issue. Yeah. Well, and because you are, I could ask you what so many journalists, reporters ask you, which is, why are you running this time again? But what I would really love, and I know we're going to get to that, Marianne, but what does democracy mean for you? Like, especially because you are running as a Democrat, like, what is
Well,
democracy? Well, yeah.
well, the issue of the Democratic Party, theoretically, no matter what political party you're in, theoretically, your dedication is equal um, to democracy itself. Democracy, the core vision of the founders that is so profound, was the repudiation of a monarchical system. It was the repudiation of the idea that a certain group of people were entitled. They were entitled to the money. They were entitled to the land. They were entitled to the opportunities for wealth creation. And basically, even when I was a child, I remember learning in school the idea of the divine right of kings. That was really the ideal. The idea was that God had given power to the king, the queen, and their rich friends, their rich cronies called the aristocrats, and the landed gentry. And basically, everybody else amounted to little more than a serf, living their lives in very limited structures. They would not be able to rise above their condition or their class. All the goods were in the hands of that very few. The American Revolution was a repudiation of that monarchical system. Obviously not perfect. Obviously 41 of the 56 signers were themselves slave owners. No intelligent observer says that that ideal was manifest. Nonetheless, it did occur in a way that was earth-shattering, in a way that posited for the founding of a nation the idea that God did not just give rights and power to the king or queen or to the aristocracy, but God gave power and rights to everyone, that all of us are created equal with these inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The reason the founders insisted on free public education, on free press, on right of assembly, right of a protest, because the idea, and once again, we know they only meant white men. They only meant white men. But once again, go from the ideal here because it still informs our history. The idea was that no matter who you were, no matter where you came from, no matter what your station in life, no matter how much money you made, the wisdom within you, if brought to the surface, if you were informed, if you were educated, if you talked to other people, then more often than not, we could rely on the accumulated wisdom of the people to govern a country. That's huge. It was radical in 1776, and it's radical today. So while we never, from our beginning, manifest that ideal fully, it has been accepted throughout certainly the majority of our history that it is the role of every generation to, quote unquote, form a more perfect union. So to expand that franchise, we say, no, you can't have slavery. We're going to abolish it. No, you can't have the institutionalized oppression of women. We're going to pass a 19th Amendment. No, you can't have segregation. We're going to dismantle segregation and have civil rights legislation. No, you can't tell gay people they can't get married. That's one of the ways they pursue happiness. We're going to have marriage equality, and on and on and on. Now, that expansion of democratic rights and opportunities is the purpose of our civic lives. And we're living at one of those times where there is a shrinking, there is a diminishment of rights, taking away women's rights for reproductive freedom and so forth. So every generation has its own task. Every generation lives out its own struggle. And we're living at a time, as other generations have, where it's our turn to rise up and push back against unjust forces. I think the thing that's pretty unique in our generation, and by generation, I mean generation of adults, is that we started out with rights that are being snatched away. Very different than some generations who just said, well, women have never had the right to vote, but they should. There has been slavery, but there shouldn't be. We're like, wait a minute, what just happened? Why are you picking on trans people all of a sudden? You right? So the larger story is just an of what other generations before us have been through. I think our, for you, PhD candidate, recognizing the importance of education, recognizing the importance of history. A lot of this has to do with a kind of psychological, intellectual, and even an emotional analysis of, wait, what's going on? In order to be able to show up for this moment. That's no different than any other thing that happens in our lives. You go through a crisis and you go, wait, I have to figure out what's happening. And that's just the human being. And I think that's where we are as a generation. It's like, what's happening? I think we saw what was happening with Trump. We saw what was happening. It wasn't that hard to figure it out once you saw it for what it was. Trump, social media, his harnessing these really lower aspects of human consciousness for his own political purposes. The job was to resist that. The job was to defeat him at the polls. And then we were all living with this hope that that will have taken care of it. Now we're recognizing that this plague of hatred and division was like a cancer that had already metastasized. So now it's a new level of analysis, understanding, and processing that we have to go through in order to face the challenge of this moment and turn things around.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Marianne. And I mean, 3 years ago, I actually manifested that I would one day talk to you. So to be faced with you right now,
Your
like
magic
I
wand
do,
worked.
yes, it worked. But I remember when you first appeared on the debate stage, and I will always remember that day after you were the number one searched term on Google was
Except
Marianne
in
Will or
Montana.
oh,
Except in Montana, because the governor of Montana was on the stage. So apparently in Montana, they said, "Who's that? That's our governor." So I think that's very funny that they Googled him. Like, who is he? He's our governor. I think that's very
but
funny.
like, and then I remember you created your podcast and I started to absorb that. And there was when listened to you read A Politics of Love, your recent book from 2019, that this harnessing love that you speak of as a political force is so powerful because you said, well, if Trump can harness hate and fear as a force for the people, I'm going to harness love. I mean, that's what you said on the debate stage, but you really lay out a political philosophy of love in your book. And we need that more than ever. So I was wondering, can you open up more about what you mean by this harnessing of love as
Well,
a political tool?
well, I think people are beginning to realize that when hatred is speaking so loud, love cannot afford to whisper. A perfect example, the story you told me about New York, drag story hour, Proud Boys show up. What's the difference? We get it now. We get it now that people like the Proud Boys would show up to intimidate people who go there, to threaten people who go there. And we were ready for them this time, not me. When I say the larger we, that was the harnessing of love. So the harnessing of hatred is looking at such factors as anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, misogyny, all of those things. And they go from thought to behavior, and then that behavior becomes collective, right? And that's very dangerous. So, what is love collectivized? Love collectivized is things like the women's suffrage movement, is things like the abolitionist movement, is things like the civil rights movement, whatever the movements are in history, where people's dedication and conviction around justice and brotherhood goes from, yes, I agree with that, to I'm going to do something about it. You know, it's one thing to look at, let's say, a threat to transgender people and say, oh, I think that's terrible. I don't agree with that at all. And that's where most people of goodwill, which I like to believe is the vast majority of Americans, would be, oh, I don't believe in that. But at a time like this, I don't believe in that, or I don't agree with that, as a sentiment is not enough. Now, once again, it's an internal shift and activation that we have to go to, not on my watch. Not on my watch. I saw on Facebook, I saw on Twitter where that story hour is going to be. I know that the Proud Boys are coming, and I'm going to be there. That's the moment we're in. That is the moment we're in.
Well, and why is fear? Because we're in this fearful, people not knowing what they don't know. I mean, it's more to it than that, but there's this, I mean, we see it right now, even with um, what's being done in our current news. We don't know whether Trump's going to be indicted. Is he going to be arrested? It's now become him trying to harness fear for his supporters to come and protest and do another January 6th. It is frightening, right, Marianne? But there's also, well,
Well,
how can we
well,
combat that?
well, I don't know what there is to combat about that. This is the system working theoretically as it should. The legal system is working. The prosecutors are deciding that they wish to indict. I think we're seeing what's happening. The meeting with the grand jury today was canceled. We don't know what's going to happen. This is the system itself. This is actually the system working, and we'll see what happens. We'll see. So far, the president has called for massive protests about this. The former president has called for massive protests about this, and we're not at this point seeing those massive protests. So this is just the drama playing out, and all of us witnessing it. That of
So,
itself is not a problem.
yeah, do you think we can breathe a sigh of relief that his supporters have lost steam in a way, that people are
We don't know
tired?
yet. We don't know yet. That's an active drama. We don't know. There are those who fear that this could make him a martyr in the eyes of a lot of people. You know, being indicted for hush money given to your mistress isn't quite the level of stuff that can really make you feel like we got him. You know, we got him technically. It was illegal. But I think this could go either way. This could go either way.
Yeah, I mean, I really hope that I'm not sure if you've been on Michael Cohen's show, but I hope eventually you get invited because I hope from what Michael Cohen has said that this is just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg, that all of the other indictments start to fall into place,
Well,
which
Michael Cohen has a lot of motivation.
Mm.
It's almost Shakespearean, some of the stuff with these people. And might be true. Michael Cohen is doing a lot of talking. This is get your popcorn, watch the drama. But we can't let, even though these circumstances are significant, don't get me wrong, we mustn't let them detract us from the larger sweeping drama that lies beyond personality, that has to do with the larger ideological, cultural, and economic erosion of our democracy. And on that level, it could almost be argued that if it hadn't been Trump, it would have been someone else. Because the conditions for that kind of attack on our democracy and the vulnerability of millions of people to that kind of ideological capture, this country was ripe for that. And the reason this country was ripe for that, and you saw this in 2016, the reason this country was ripe for that was, as FDR said, we would not have to worry about a fascist takeover as long as democracy delivered on its promises. And what's been happening for decades is that democracy has not delivered on its promises. What does that mean? Well, in every other advanced democracy, people have universal health care, and they have tuition-free college, and they have free childcare, and they have a guaranteed living wage, and they have family leave, and they have paid sick leave. So why don't we have that? This is an example. So the reason we don't have that is because the power in this country has been handed over to this matrix of corporate forces.
Hi, this is Andrew, and I'm interrupting what I know is an enthralling interview because I want you all to know that we are sponsored by Broadview Press. And if you don't know, Broadview Press is an independent academic publisher who publishes books covering topics like English studies, writing, philosophy, history, gender studies. And every season on the podcast, I interview one of the Broadview Press authors. So for the fall, we had Anne Stevens on to talk about literary theory and criticism. She played a Wizard of Oz literary game with us. She talked about why Bridgerton actually involves literary theory. So does 50 Shades of Grey. Who knew? And also, we just had on Jeffrey Weinstock, who wrote the first ever pop culture analysis book. So, you know, I am all things a lover of pop culture, especially my Hollywood topics, Real Housewives, the list goes on. And he also wrote the book called The Mad Scientist's Guide to Composition, where he's writing a book teaching students about how to write rhetorical strategies, but it's all around this metaphor of being in the mad scientist laboratory, because as you'll learn when you hear our episode with Jeffrey, he is a gothic and horror fanatic. And I mean that in all the best ways possible. So you don't want to miss Broadview Press's exclusive discount because you're listening to the podcast. All of you get an automatic 20% off. Use the code Ivory Tower for 20% off site-wide on all of their books. So in our show notes, we have a link to Broadview Press. Make sure you click the link, put in Ivory Tower, and you're going to get 20% off your order. So enjoy your reading, everyone.
Insurance companies, big pharmaceutical companies, chemical companies, big food companies, big agricultural companies, gun manufacturers, big oil, and defense contractors. There you see that reversion to an aristocratic system. So whereas all men are created equal, the democratic ideal repudiated that aristocratic paradigm, we're reverting to it. We're moving backwards. That's the, who exactly plays what part in that drama is not as important as our understanding the paradigmatic shifts that are involved in all that. So we have to deliver the promises of democracy to people. If those promises are not delivered, it forms mass groups of people in despair, and large groups of desperate people become a petri dish out of which all manner of personal and societal dysfunction is almost inevitable, and that includes attraction to a really malevolent character such as Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And that's happened throughout history. So, you're once again, higher education. Just, I always say to people, if you're too lazy to read the French Revolution, just read Yertle the Turtle sometime, because it's all there. Dr. Seuss told the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth for kids. So if you don't want to go any deeper than that, this is simply unsustainable, because it's created this profound wealth inequality, opportunity inequality, and it's an unsustainable situation. All manner of chaos becomes inevitable.
Yeah, well, and even just being in the university system now for at least, I've been in it for 12 to 13 years since undergrad, and this exploitation that I've seen happen of grad students, specifically adjunct faculty, like we're not even making minimum wage, but yet we have to teach and research, and we're being treated as employees, but universities don't want to call you an employee because then you get access to certain benefits. And it's this tug of war.
And there's this, there's a growing recognition around that. This all has to do with the exploitation of labor, which is baked into the cake in this paradigm of unfettered capitalism that has just exploded onto the scene over the last 50 years in a way that must now be fundamentally repudiated. And it is not reasonable to assume that it will be fundamentally repudiated from within the system that is enabling those forces to begin with. And so what the corporatist Democrats do, I mean, the Republicans are, hook, line, and sinker. That's who they are. That's who they're to represent, who they are there to represent. The Democratic Party is trying to have it both ways. So the corporatist Democrats really do understand the suffering and really do want to help you, in these peripheral ways to survive the injustice. But they are unwilling to challenge the underlying corporate forces that make the return of all that suffering inevitable, because of they're taking the donations too. So the real progressive vision is that it's the amelioration of stress is not enough. We need the fundamental economic reform that comes from knowing that such huge industries need to stay in their lane. And of course, in the case of universal health care, with some of those industries, you even wonder, do we really need you?
Yeah. Well, and something that can be disheartening, but when I hear you speak, Marianne, and so many other progressive thinkers, especially the educator analysts, those in the education sector, that you think that you can trust in these good actors, quote unquote, good actors, because they have gotten PhDs or they're supposed to be into the humanities and the arts, but yet when they're trying to hire, they're looking at what benefits the university, quote unquote, as a corporate model. And it's
Absolutely.
so
First of all,
disheartening.
yeah. Well, we've gotten over, Josh Hawley went to Harvard, and Ted Cruz went to Harvard, and I think Ron DeSantis went to Harvard. So, Harvard, you got a lot of explaining to do as far as I'm concerned. The larger issue you're bringing up there, though, has to do with these multi-billion-dollar endowments. The stories that you hear from people who have a child at a school, even an Ivy League school. I'm thinking of one where my friend's daughter goes to one of the top Ivy League schools, talking about how the water is dripping from her ceiling and they just put a tarp up, and they don't have Wi-Fi access, and they have to go to the student center. My friend was saying they have multi-billion-dollar endowments, not to even mention how much their parents or whomever in that case is paying for tuition. So yeah, what happens with unfettered capitalism is that it is a heat-seeking missile wherever there is a profit to be made. Wherever there, and what's so unethical about it is often that profit is to be made on the backs of workers, on the backs of students just trying to get an education, on the back of the earth, on the back of children. And until we recognize and are willing to say so and do something about it, the sociopathic nature of such a system that puts short-term corporate profits before all other considerations, before health, safety, well-being of people, planet, animals, then we will continue on what is now a profoundly self-destructive trajectory, not only for our democracy, but even for our planet.
Yes, and also where people are getting their information from, right? I mean, we have to definitely address the mainstream media in its complexity, but something that really I feel is so empowering about what you do, Marianne, is that you reach out to independent journalists like myself or those who are students, those who are thinkers. I'm thinking when you go on Barry Weiss's show, who I look up to as a journalist, that so many in politics wouldn't even want to speak to independent journalists. They would want to only talk to those in the echo chambers, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, to be amongst that group. So why is it so important for you to reach out to
Well, this isn't
grassroots journalism?
it isn't like I'm eschewing them. It's that there is a media blackout. The
Mm.
Democratic establishment does not want anyone to primary Joe Biden. They think he should be coronated, apparently. And it's outrageous to me. It's so undemocratic, this idea that no one else should have the audacity to primary the president. You know, when I grew up, Eugene McCarthy primary Johnson, Bobby Kennedy primary Johnson. The current view of the Democratic establishment, the DNC, et cetera, is that Teddy Kennedy primary Carter, and that weakened Carter. Well, my view is Ronald Reagan defeated Carter, not Teddy Kennedy, and democracy is healthy. And how can you claim to be a party that stands up for democracy when you yourself are so afraid of it in your own house? So what's happening here is that the word has gone out to CNN. We will not have her on. The word has gone out to MSNBC. I was on one show to Jonathan Capehart, which I appreciate. Beyond that, apparently, no. CBS, the same. ABC has been very good to me. I've been on a couple of times, but the others seem to be following some directive. So much for the free press. I mean, theoretically, if somebody is a declared candidate for president of the United States, you might have her on.
Yeah, well, we thank you for being on and all the
Well,
other
thank you.
shows that yeah, you
People.
get. Well, I mean,
Exactly.
and your message is really, I have to say, the way that social media, you know, your press team, but just your message being delivered to TikTok, which I consume, and the Gen Zers. I'm a millennial, but TikTok has become such an important tool. And I did once in a while, I'll catch The View. I listen to their podcast and I heard them, yes, spin your narrative. And I really think so many who are listening right now that they come in with these preconceived notions about you that so upset me to the core
Yeah.
because I mean, upset you definitely more than me countering it, but that you're kooky and the spiritualism is turned on its head, but your
I think,
spiritual, yes, go ahead.
yeah, this last thing with The View was actually worse than that I was kooky. I mean, that was really smear machine.
Mm.
I think at one point, Joy Behar said I was the Democratic version of George Santos and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Yeah. Yeah, and a deep mischaracterization, a deep misrepresentation of my work with ill people, saying I told people their disease wasn't real and all of that kind of stuff. It's terrible, actually. But that system does what it does. It is intent on keeping anyone out of the conversation other than themselves. I know that crowd, you know, and we all know their perch. And the idea that we should that they seem to purport that they are the sophisticated grown-ups here, and the rest of us should just sit this out because they know what they're doing. They clearly do not know what they're doing, or we would not be 6 inches from the cliff in terms of the state of our democracy, the state of our economy, the state of our planet, and so forth. So they know what they're doing to perpetuate the system as it is. I don't want to perpetuate the system as it is. I want to disrupt the system as it is. So clearly they're rattled. Well, they wouldn't be so mean. But, developing tough skin is part of what you need to do to prepare for running for president.
Well, I feel that you must really know, Marianne, how to tune out the naysayers.
Yes, and the thing is, the way misinformation works, though, even people who think, oh, I'm not vulnerable to that, clearly are. Because some of the people that seem to buy into some of that stuff, it's very difficult, the power of social media. And there are people to whom you can say, these are the facts, and they've got their story and they're sticking to it. But I do think over time, and it's interesting watching over time, truth outs. I believe that.
That's powerful. Well, and to her credit, Sarah Haynes did say, why shouldn't Marianne run? Like, this is
Yeah.
a democracy. So, which is true. We should
Yeah,
have
that's right.
healthy competition and
Yeah. And they
um
shouldn't lie about people.
no. Well, and did they even reach out to you, Marianne, to give you a
No, as a
chance?
matter of fact, at the end, Whoopi Goldberg said, Marianne, you're going to have to work harder to get people to see you differently or something. And I put on Twitter, be glad to come on, to maybe convince them not to smear me, or at the very least to convince their audience that they are smearing me. And no response. Our press team reached out, no response. I think they know I'd lay down a few things if I was there. They don't want
Well,
that.
hopefully you get that chance eventually. Well, you're not going to hold your breath, but I
No,
am curious,
I don't
has
go to bed at night
yes,
saying a
yes.
little prayer that I can be on The View.
Well, has even President Biden's team reached out?
Oh, they reach out plenty with the Corinne Jean-Pierre mocking me from the presidential briefing stage. That was not a spontaneous moment.
Mm.
They
Well,
just don't think anyone should primary the president. So
well, and it's upsetting when you don't get the chance to actually rebuttal and have that
I
debate.
did. I made a video after Corinne Jean-Pierre made her comments. But even this is what they want. They want you and me talking about this rather than talking about the fact that the average American does not have health care and should. They don't want us talking about the fact that 68,000 people a year die in this country because they do not have lack of health care. They don't want us talking about the fact that 1 in 4 Americans live in medical debt. They don't want us talking about the fact that 18 million Americans cannot afford to fulfill the prescriptions that their doctors give them. They don't want us talking about the $88 billion medical debt, none of which even exists in a country where there's universal health care. So this is what the media does. It's all about throwing dust in people's eyes. They don't want us talking about the fact that half of America's seniors live on $25,000 and less a year. They don't want that. They don't want us talking about the fact that a third of America's workforce lives on less than $15 an hour and can't afford a place to live, or the 600,000 homeless people in this country, or the 12 million hungry children. They don't want us talking about that. They don't want us talking about the fact that even though the president has said that that climate change is an existential crisis, that he has given more oil drilling permits than Trump did at this point in his presidency, and that he just okayed an $8 billion fossil fuel extraction ConocoPhillips big oil project that will be on the north slopes of Alaska. So this is all just a way, get her out of the conversation, blah, 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 so that you don't listen to what I'm saying, to remind people that we have been trained to expect too little. Before the 1960s, there was tuition-free college in this country. In the 1970s, the average American worker had good benefits, could afford a home, could afford a car, could afford a yearly vacation, could afford one parent to stay home with their kids, and could afford to send their kids to college. That was in the 1970s. But because of this massive transfer of wealth, $50 trillion from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1%, all of that wealth, all of that opportunity has been sucked into the hands of a very few. Once again, the reversion to that aristocratic system. They don't want us to talk. They don't want somebody having a megaphone who's going to point that out, because that blows the whole thing. Now, I think that only someone who names it is going to beat the Republicans in 2024. So some of them would say, Marianne, how dare you? You're blowing it. You're being a spoiler. Don't you understand the threat of fascism represented by Ron DeSantis? Yeah, I do. That's why I'm doing this, because I don't think you can beat big lies with anything except big truth. I'm naming big truths. They name some truth, but not the whole truth, not nothing but the truth. You know, they're coming back, oh, the president's made the economy so much better. Now, if you are among 20% of Americans, the economy is good in this country. I actually have, I'm part of that 20%. I don't have a problem in my life. I have opportunity for wealth creation. Should I take it? I can write a book, or I can teach a class. I'm not complaining, except that I have evolved in my own consciousness, as I think most people have, to the point that realize it's not just about me. If you are within that 20%, you are living on an enchanted island that is surrounded by a vast sea of economic despair.
Hey, Ivory Tower Boiler Room listeners and true crime friends. You've heard me gush over this incredible woman and her beautiful products. I'm talking about Mandy Made It. Mandy makes customized and original crochet and pre-cut goods. They are the perfect, unique, one-of-a-kind gift for literally anyone in your life. And she makes incredible home decor. I still have my pumpkins that I put out every fall. I just love them. Check her out on Instagram at MANDEE Made It, or search Mandy Made It on Facebook. To order, just slide into her DMs, and if you mention the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, you will receive a free personalized gift with your first order. So, go on Instagram and look up at Mandy Made It, and Mandy is spelled MANDEE. Again, her handle is at Mandy Made It, Mandy spelled MANDEE, and order today.
Hi, this is Andrew. So, when I'm not here in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, sometimes I'm actually invited to be on other podcasts as a guest. Well, there is one podcast run by Christian Garcia and his co-host Nate that I absolutely love. It is called That Old Gay Classic Cinema. So calling all you classic cinema fans out there and those who love queer themed cinema, which I think there's a lot of you who are listening right now where you've perked up. So follow them on Instagram at That OL Gay Classic Cinema. The first ever episode I was featured as a guest, it's The Sound of Music. I got to talk about being Captain Von Trapp in high school, and it's just such an exciting conversation. They've also featured discussions about Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, which features guests from the podcast The Garland Gab and Down the Yellow Brick Pod. There's a deep dive of Cinderella, and recently they had an episode on the film Giants starring Elizabeth Taylor, Rock Hudson, and James Dean. And actually, one of the guests, Lauren Randall, I know from Stony Brook University's PhD English department. So shout out, Lauren. You can listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. It's definitely such a great listen. So why not listen to it after you listen to this current episode on the Ivory Tower Boiler Room?
And, it's interesting because in 2016, there were two candidates who named that. There were two candidates who said to people, your rage is justified. One was named Bernie Sanders and one was named Donald Trump. The difference between them was that Bernie wanted to actually do something about it. Trump was just saying those things because he knew it was a way to get power. And it was the Democratic Party who suppressed Bernie. And they suppressed Bernie for the same reasons that now they're trying to suppress me. That is inconvenient to the system, even within the corporate Democrats, to actually name that clearly the corruption of the entire political system in the United States.
Yeah. Well, and don't you think 2023, I mean, I like to believe this is the year of everything coming to the forefront, that these issues need to be addressed and humanity needs to win out in the end with empathy, empathy now can be harnessed actually as
Well,
a political power.
it's interesting. I think 2023 is a year in which there is a developing, if not already developed, critical mass of people who are seeing that if we don't change things for the better, they're proactively, with conviction and power and intention and willingness, then they are going to get very, very bad. My father used to say, if they're coming for anybody, they can come for you. And that circles back even to what we were talking about, transgender, at the beginning of the show. If they can do that to transgender people, what makes you think they're not going to do it to your group?
Yeah. Well, they've already done it to women's rights with Roe v. Wade.
Well, and look at Black men and police brutality. I mean, we have plenty of examples of transgression against what should be considered basic human rights in any society.
Yeah. Well, and actually, I'm glad you brought up your father, and may he, rest in peace. And he's such a powerful presence in healing the soul of America and all your work. But I'm just remember he had this activist sense. And when he found out you were really drawn to the Course in Miracles, I think this is the story, but, please correct me if I'm wrong, Marianne. And he at first didn't really understand how that was an urgent mission, but you convinced him that no, I actually have found my purpose.
Yeah, he said, what are you doing? I raised you to wage the revolution. My father was an immigration lawyer and my brother was an immigration lawyer. And you're supposed to go out there and change the world. And I said to him, I am, Daddy. I think love is the greatest power to change the world. And before he died, my father had become he would listen to my tapes and got it, because what he needed to hear was, oh, you're still trying to change the world, though. I said, yeah. He said, okay, as long as you're trying to change the world. So I do believe that a change in consciousness is as important as a change in policy. Ultimately, there has to be a whole person integrative approach to healing a society, just as we need a whole person integrative approach to healing the human body. Now, this, I think, is why you were talking about TikTok before. This is why I think one group that I do feel sees me these days is Gen Z, because they're not 20th century people. They weren't even born in the 20th century, a lot of them. Many of them just hung out as babies for a few years while they got their sea legs living on the earth. They're 21st century thinkers. And the 21st century mindset is not the old mechanistic Newtonian paradigm of the 20th century. James Jeans, a British physicist, said it turns out that the world is not one big machine, it's one big thought. So I feel with a lot of these Gen Z, they grew up with mothers who read books like mine, It's a more expanded view. You don't just treat the symptoms, whether you're healing a body or you're healing society. That's a much more natural conversation for many young people today. And that's why I think there's such a groundswell coming up from the bottom of things of people who are saying, you know what, the way we've been doing it is not the way we need to keep doing it. We need to break the cord individually, take what was right about the past, build on that, stand on the shoulders of giants, but in some other places, just cut the cord and know that it's time for something completely new.
Yeah, well, and talking to you, I'm thinking back to that Marianne Williamson from the 1970s who, was so inspiring that I remember going to be a cabaret singer, maybe. You went to a theater and philosophy program at Pomona. in California, then you end up in New Mexico, living in a dome.
Yeah,
And
all those
like,
things are
there's,
true.
yeah, but like, what do you think that Marianne would see about this Marianne standing before me right now? How would she have processed your journey?
Well, when you're young, you sort of can't imagine getting older. You almost have a feeling that it won't happen to you. It's like your little secret. Oh, I'm not going to get older. Um, I remember thinking when I was a younger woman, wow, I wonder what it's like to be like 50. um, I don't know how my younger self would process who I am now, but I know the way as an older self, I process my younger self. And I think this is true of many people. I look back and just wish I could say to my younger self, oh, relax,
Hmm.
enjoy every moment, enjoy being young, enjoy it, suck the juice out of it. Life will unfold. Everything that's supposed to happen will happen. Every lesson you need to learn will be placed in front of you, but don't even think about the future. Just be where you are and love every minute of it. That's what I wish, if I could say anything, when I was.
Yeah.
And then another thing about that, you're the same person at 70 that you are at 20, that you are at 7 years old. The spirit within us is the deeper essential truth of us, and it doesn't age.
Yeah. Well, and do
Yeah.
you feel like that pneumatic life, we can call it, but that pneumatic life you were living, it seems like all of those experiences, though, of just traveling across the country, which you did,
Absolutely.
it shapes who you are
Absolutely.
now.
Absolutely. And I say that to people all the time, before you have children, before you are in situations where you have to be a certain place. I think the 20s are hard. I point that out to kids all the time. They're not a mental illness. They're hard. They're hard. It's a time of having to individuate, as you and I were talking about before. It's not necessarily an easy time, but it's a time when people should have the chance to take the great adventures and the journeys of life. That's why these college loan debts drive me nuts. I can't even imagine what it would be like to be in your 20s carrying tens of thousands of dollars of debt. I mean, this would mess with your head as a young person. Carrying debt at any time in your life is a difficult psychological pressure. And far too many Americans do. Billions and billions, hundreds of billions of people, hundreds of billions of dollars, not of people, hundreds of billions of dollars. But for people in their 20s to be carrying their debts when all they were trying to do was get educated so that they could spread their wings, so that they could soar, so that they could actualize their own potential. It is so wrong that this would turn into a profit center. It is so immoral. And that's why these debts should be eradicated. They should never have been there. This society has to atone and make amends. This is why people who were put in prison for marijuana, they should never have been there. So we have to make right. We have to make right with some of the mistakes of our past in order to move forward and have the future that we want in this country.
Yeah. Well, and what do you say to those who, I mean, we always hear it. It does irk my soul, as I'm sure it does yours, but the ones who feel that meritocracy mindset of, well, I had to pay for it, then why do those who did take out the loans, why are they being given loan forgiveness? It's,
Well,
yeah.
it's a very selfish attitude. It's
Mhm.
like somebody saying, why did I have to, with somebody who's going to be let out of jail for marijuana charges, going to say, well, I think everybody after me who smoked marijuana should go to jail. I had to go to jail. They should go to jail. My father grew up very poor and lived through like the worst ravages of the Depression. He didn't look at his children and say, well, it should be tough for you because it was tough for me. He looked at his children and thank God society has advanced and my children will not have to go through this. But he never let us forget what it was like. And he never not so much in his life, but in other people's lives when we would see them. So that's just an attitude that I don't believe represents the better angel of our nature. I don't want
Yes.
someone to suffer just because I suffered. I want to feel happy that they won't have to. Listen, everybody's going to have their own trials. Everybody's going to have their own challenges. You don't have to worry about that.
Mhm.
Everybody's going to be carrying their own burden. But let's not purposely make it more difficult for people just so that somebody over there can make more money. It's just wrong. It's unethical. It's immoral, and it needs to stop.
Yeah. Well, the better angel of our nation is so powerful of a saying, Marianne. And, as we're nearing the end of our time, there's something I always think about. I mean, I was raised Catholic, but I discovered my Jewish roots with my family. And
Really? So
yes,
where was that?
um, actually, well, both on my mom's side, it's more we can trace it easier because they were Ashkenazi, but
Uh-huh.
it's at least like 3 generations ago.
Wow.
And then on my dad's, there's this Sephardic ancestry that we've learned about because a
Wow.
relative traveled to Italy and they couldn't find our name. And they said, oh, well, most likely a name like that would have been a family from Egypt who left and fled to go to Italy to establish a Jewish
Right.
life in the south of
Wow.
Italy. So,
Wow. Wow. Wow.
yeah. But a lot of that from my family, there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of secrets that people don't talk about. And I said, I'm going to air this all. Like, I need to find my own discovery. I need to understand what spirituality means to me. So when I've read your work, I've heard your lectures, I keep thinking of that idea of the mitzvah, of the Jewish idea of community spirit, community empowerment, right? Being here for the moment and helping each other. Um, do you feel that that is a huge part in your life, is being present with everyone who you interact with to try to empower each other?
Well, I think that that's an essential spiritual theme at the heart of all great religions,
Mm.
that we love one another, that we do justice, that we love mercy, that we walk humbly with our God. Whether you're talking about Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, or any secular philosophy of righteousness and ethics, we are hardwired for connection. I think that's one of the roots of our mental health crisis. Our system separates us, sets us against each other. And that's not our natural state. Our natural state is to reach out to each other. Our natural state is to care for one another. Our natural state is to live in community. And I think what people are beginning to see now is that if we don't rediscover that, we're going down.
Mhm.
So
Mm.
I think people are seeing the urgency of this moment, and whether they are finding the directive and the guidance for that kind of evolution and transformation within ourselves through a religious or spiritual practice, or just an ethical awakening, doesn't matter so much. What matters is that there is an evolution of consciousness that's going on within us and within our civilization, which I believe is the only hope for mankind at this point.
Yeah. Well, I think you have said so much here, Marianne. I've really appreciated and I thank you for your time. I think you've laid out what an America 2.0 looks like in all of its practicalities. I am so thankful you're running. This
Well,
has meant
thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And all of your listeners can go to Marianne
Yes.
2024 if they want to join the process.
Yes. And how can they follow your campaign and also you on social
Just go to
media?
Marianne2024.com, throw in $3 if you can, $5, whatever is right for you. Follow me on Twitter, Mara Williamson, Instagram, TikTok, as you were mentioning, Facebook. I'm out there. I'm not hard to find.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait for everyone to hear this. And again, Marianne Williamson, to say that I've gotten to meet you, this has been a true pleasure. Thank
Thank
you
you so
so
much.
much.
God bless. Talk
Yeah.
to you later.
Bye. Talk to you later. Welcome to the spring season. This is Andrew from the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Make sure that you always listen to our new episodes on Mondays. Are you following us on social media? No? Oh, you need to. Follow the Ivory Tower Boiler Room on TikTok and Instagram at Ivory Tower Boiler Room and on Twitter at Ivory Boiler Room.
Hey, true crime friends. This is Mary DePippi, host of True Crime in Academia. Don't forget, episodes come out on Fridays at 7:30 p.m. And you can also follow True Crime in Academia on social media. On Instagram and TikTok, we're at True Crime in Academia. and on Twitter at TC in Academia.
And Mary and I, we need some coffee. We need to keep a pep in our step, and we just need that caffeine. So, do you know we
sound
have
energetic? We're not. We're tired.
Yeah, no, this is all coffee. So the Ivory Tower Boiler Room Cafe is our Patreon, patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. $5 a month unlocks so many bonus episodes. So for the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, you get Mary and I, our exclusive winter arts and culture hot takes, including what do we think about Prince Harry, Pamela Anderson? Were our Oscars predictions right? Why does James Cameron have to make Avatar movies? We want more Titanic. Okay, and also I dissect straight gym bro culture with Dominic Janes. Why are people afraid of sodomy? You get all the uncensored conversations on Patreon. That's where our bonus episodes are. And I know, Mary, what do you have on Patreon?
Oh, we have a lot right now. I cover cases that I would not cover on the podcast. So if you want to access those, like Andrew said, go to patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. So you can see episodes from True Crime, like The Dating Game Killer, AKA Rodney Alcala. Or you can see the live video interviews that we have done. Most recently, I interviewed not one, but 2 forensic psychologists. And get this, I only released 30 minutes of the actual audio to the podcast. So that means the whole extra 30 minutes is on Patreon just for subscribers.
Wait, an extra 30 minutes?
Extra 30 minutes.
A cup of coffee, everyone. Okay, well, I also want to shout out our amazing internship team here. So our interns include Andrea, Sarah, Caitlin, Rosie, and Sheila. A round of applause to all of them. We thank you. They keep the Ivory Tower Boiler Room literally going. So Mary and I are so appreciative. Thanks to our audience. And we can't wait to see you back here. Bye, everyone.